Daith da, Ewi Nakan. Welcome to podcast number 91. Well, I've had quite a varied week, so there's a few things I want to talk about this week, but I think I will start with an update on last week's podcast about Washaway. And I've had Joanne and Sandra, two different messages come to me, one by email and one was actually on my podcast. I can't remember if my personal one, I think. And they had both heard that the name Washaway resulted because there was a battle in that area centuries ago, perhaps around the time of the Civil War. And they reckon that then when the rain came, it washed all the blood down the hill. So it washed away the blood. Now, whether that's true, that's things that they've heard. It's been passed down kind of through generations, etc. But I know Sandra did say that the pub there now was always known as the Washaway Inn, and apparently it is haunted. But it was quite interesting. A few other things she did say was that the troops had a camp in Pencarrow Woods in the Second World War, and the huts were still there when she was small, and they used to secretly go in them. So that's just a little bit to add on to me bit about Washaway last week. But that might be the reason 'tis called Washaway, because the blood was washed away with the rain. On Saturday afternoon, I went down Redruth and I watched Cornwall play Hampshire in the county championship. Now, 'twas a bit of a dead rubber, really, because Cornwall had lost last week. There was no chance they was going to get through to the final at Twickenham. But having said that, 'twas a blimmin' good afternoon. The sun was shining. The Falmouth Marine Band was there. At half-time, there was players from the team from 1991 came out onto the pitch, including dear John May from St Mirren. A good afternoon was had by all. And Cornwall, they was in the lead. It was pretty tight first half. I think from memory it was 20-17. But then the second half, Cornwall just ploughed ahead and ended up winning the game 48-24. And I went to Elfar Corner, which I always like to go. And I heard somebody say to me towards the end, he said, I knowed we was going to win the game because Hampshire wouldn't be used to our tropical climate down here. And the sun was shining, and he proved to be right. And then Sunday, for the first time, I would say in 2 years or more, Beth and me, we went out on our push bikes with the coasters on their morning ride. And Dr. Bob was leading the way, and we ended up round Luxillian and that down Lanidrock for a bit of coffee and cake, which was fantastic. And again, the sun was shining, so we managed to get out with them, and we won't leave it quite so long next time. And then in the evening, Days treated me to an evening down at the Pictures, the Regal Cinema here in Wadebridge. And we had our seats there. And next thing I knew, I looked round my shoulder and there was dear Amy Moon bringing her father, John Moon, my dear old mate, and he come and they sat next to us while we watched the film. I expect a lot of you know John, and if you troll back through, you will listen. He's been on the podcast before. Very interesting interview he gave. So the four of us were sat there to watch the film King for a Day. Now, if you get a chance to watch this film, 'tis well worth it. But 'tis quite hard to see. They only went round to certain cinemas. I say it's called King for a Day, and it's an hour-long documentary on the Obios down at Padstow. And they go right back to some footage. Right back, black and white, earliest footage you can imagine being filmed. And they come right back up to the year when Mike England was the master of ceremonies for the Blue Ribbon Horse. And so, I don't know if that was 2013, I think. I don't know. But 'tis a fantastic film. And there's so many of our old mates there talking, being interviewed. Fantastic filming. Well worth the watch. And then when it finished, we then had a question and answer session with the lady that made the film and dear Maureen Tatlow from Padstow. And 'twas a very enjoyable evening. There was a good gang there. A lot of Padstonians come up and a lot of Bridgers was there too. And I say, if you can watch it, you may be able to hire it or something, rent it on the internet. But I don't think it's going to be in many other cinemas around. But if you're interested in Padsta or Cornish traditions, Cornwall outings and how it's changed and everything, 'tis well worth watching King for a Day. And actually, backtracking a little bit, Sunday afternoon, me and Daisy, we had to go up St. Breward. We had a funeral there Monday morning, so we had to check all was well. And when we got to work, there's just a swarm of thousands of bees in our car park. And I did put a little video on my Facebook page, and our dear friend Sarah Bennett, a bit of a beekeeping expert as well as a horse rustler, she got in touch and she said if they're still there this evening, give Gav a ring. Gav will come and sort them out, take them away. So they were still there in the evening. It was quite good. I put a photo up because they all kind of huddled over protecting the queen bee in the evening when we got back from the cinema. And then Gav come in the morning and he took them away safely. So then we came on to Monday. And Monday I already had a fairly busy day planned because we had a couple of funerals. So it was different areas. And then we had a family that was desperate to have their funeral on Monday, and I always like to try and accommodate if we can. So I did manage to have that funeral in between the other two. So I was, going flat out really on Monday, but everything went fine. And then once I finished, I knew I was then having 2 days off. And Tuesday morning, we headed up to England. We put our sat-nav, we was going to Manchester. And we set off about 9 o'clock-ish, and our hearts sunk because the first thing the woman said on the sat-nav was delays of between 3 and 4 hours. Now, I trust this woman on the sat-nav because she actually pronounces Eglosale right. So I always stick with her. So we thought, crumbs, we're going to have to get going. At one stage, she said we weren't going to get up to Manchester until 6:30. Well, we was going to up to watch. There's a couple of young boy bands that we was going to watch. It started at 7:30, and the first band was the Doobie Brothers, and then the main act was the Eagles. So we thought, crumbs, this is going to be a bit tight. But as we getting closer to Manchester, dear of her, she took us over, off route through the Cheshire countryside. Beautiful. I was amazed actually how beautiful it is up there. Nearly as nice as Cornwall. And we actually got to our hotel about 4 o'clock. And my in-laws went up as well. So we met up with they went up on the train. I don't think they could stick listening to me talking for all that time. And then we had a bit of tea. And then they had this free tram. So we got on the tram and it took us straight to Co-op Live is where the concert was. And we got there in plenty of time to watch these two boy bands perform. Now, Mehdi that was sat next to me, I think he was from Hull. And we understood each other right. And I think he said this place cost about £100 million to build. And, of course, it's meant to be built purely for music concerts. So they reckon the sound is fantastic. Whereas sometimes if you go to these football stadiums, the sound can be hit and miss. So the Doobie Brothers, they come on 7:30. And I said to my missus, I said, I ain't very impressed with this sound. It was very shrill and tinny. You couldn't hear the bass. And I thought, I don't know what to make of this. But once the Eagles come on, you realised that the Doobie Brothers had suffered from that syndrome of the support act with inferior equipment. Because when the Eagles started, the sound was perfect. And they started at 9 o'clock and they played for 2 hours. And when you consider that most of them, I think, are 76, it was fantastic. They reached all the high notes. Joe Walsh on his guitar, fantastic. I did film just the guitar bits of Hotel California and they had it pretty much note for note. It was brilliant. And I think it was Don Henley said near the beginning how he was pleased to be there performing in Manchester. In fact, he said, we'd be pleased at our age to be anywhere, which brought a few laughs. And then Joe Walsh, he said he could remember some brilliant times he'd had in the UK playing, but there was a lot of times that he couldn't remember anything about it. And he said he remembered one night he went out with Keith Moon from The Who, and that night lasted 3 days. And he said apparently, according to the police records, they had a fantastic time. But he can't remember anything about it. But they were absolutely brilliant. So then we come out of the stadium. Well, of course, then there's tens of thousands of us. And you're queuing for these trams. And we thought, crikey, we can be here for ages. So we thought we'll walk home to the hotel. It was only about a half a mile walk. So I got my sat-nav on, and it was a beautiful little walk down the canal. And we was walking, I would say, for 20 minutes beside this canal. I mean, 'twas a little bit secluded. 'Twas dark. You didn't know quite if 'twas a safe place to walk, really. But it was beautiful. I'd love to have gone back there the next day and took some photos, but we had to shoot off the next day. But we got back to the hotel, well, about midnight, I suppose, and thoroughly enjoyed it. So then the next day, we was up Fairby time because the in-laws, they was staying up there. We had to take, they was hiring a car. So then about 9:15, we kind of left. We dropped they off, and then I had to come back to Saltash. And I had plenty of time. Mrs. on the sat-nav, she said, you're fine. There's no hold-ups. So we was good. And we got back to Saltash, I would say about 3:45. I had me top hat and tails and me stripes in the car because at 4:30 we was resting a very dear friend of ours in the church there at Saltash. Now, you might think, what are he doing up Saltash again? Because we was only up there about 10 days ago. Well, this is for dear Brian Anderson, Father Brian, as we know him back here in Wadebridge. And for many years, he was the vicar here, the rector. I expect a lot of you can remember Father Brian. 24 years ago, he conducted our wedding when me and Beth got married up St. Breock. Very popular vicar, lovely man. Him and Linda, they lived, well, they was kind of neighbours to us, really, because they lived in the rectory in Trevanion Road, and we was in Glen Road, and of course our back gardens joined on to the same lane. So he couldn't get away from us weekends and evenings, and he was stuck with us, weekdays as well, because back then a lot of funerals were church funerals, whereas now I would say 80% of funerals are non-religious. Back then, a huge chunk of funerals was church funerals, and he was a lovely chap, and we always did have a chuckle. And I was actually saying this to his children, Helen and Nick. The one thing that always sticks in my mind is obviously my childish sense of humour. But we had a big funeral at Eglesale. 'Twas Brian Dearvan. He was the local window cleaner. I expect a lot of you will remember him. And 'twas in the church. And 'twasn't till I was kind of just going in the church, and you kind of picturing what's going to be happening for the service and everything. And then something come into my mind. And Father Brian, whenever he started a funeral service, he would always start with the same sentence. So he would always say, we're here today to thank God for the life of George, Sue, or whoever. And it just come to me, I thought, hang on, is he going to say it today, or is he going to realise and say something different? Now, what I'm on about is Monty Python and the film The Life of Brian, which obviously is, what shall I say, frowned upon a bit by the Church of England. And fantastic film. I dearly like it. I dearly like it. But I thought, is he going to realise or no? And dear of him, he didn't. And I don't think hardly anybody else in the church realised. But me, with my, childish sense of humour, I thought, is he going to say it? And dear of him, sure enough, he did. So he started the service. We're here today to thank God for the life of Brian. Proper. Dear of him. So we always did have a chuckle about that, I must admit. But he was a lovely chap. He was a prebendary, actually, at St. Indelian. And it was lovely that our dear friend, Professor Andrew Lewis, who is also a prebendary, gave the sermon today. So we rested Father Brian in church last night at 4:30, and then today we had his funeral service there at Saltash. Church was absolutely packed. They put chairs everywhere because he was such a popular and well-liked man. So we'll miss you, Brian. Rest in peace. So also today and tomorrow and Saturday is the Royal Cornwall Show. And when we was leaving this morning, we left 20 to 9 from Wadebridge to go up Saltash to get there nice and early. And I tell you what, the traffic was queued back from the showground right the way through, right past through Slade's Bridge, nearly up to Washaway, up to St. Conan's Church. So Washaway definitely just keeps being mentioned all the time at the minute. So they must have had a fantastic crowd today. And the weather had been handsome. We've got the interment tomorrow at St. Conan's, actually, so we might wash away again tomorrow. And then I'm open to go up show on Saturday. I think I've only missed perhaps a couple years. I've actually missed shows. I know one year we went up, we was going to go up in the afternoon, and the weather was that bad, we turned around. But usually I go up for a full day every year. Sometimes when we was younger, we'd go up all 3 days. Absolutely brilliant. Now, for those of you outside Cornwall who think, what the hang's he on about? Well, the Royal Cornwall Show is an agricultural show, and nowadays 'tis based in Wadebridge. Years ago, it used to move around a little bit, but it was actually formed back in 1793. I think that's when it was founded. And Philip, my dear friend, he got this brilliant book, which was written by Chris Riddle, who was the show secretary. And this year, actually, is his last show. His father, Albert, was the secretary before him. Lovely bloke, absolutely gem of a chap. And now Chris took over, and this year is Chris's final year. So the Cornwall Agricultural Society, I think, was formed in 1793. And I think one of the main ones behind it was Sir William Molesworth of Pencarrow, which again is up Washaway. So we're being dragged back to Washaway all the time. And others there at the time, I think the Bassetts was there, Tremaines, to name but a few. And I think the Lord Viscount Falmouth was actually elected as the president. And I think the Falmouths and the Molesworths and Albans have been connected with the society all the way through until the present day. And I know early on they had classes for all livestock. They had classes for, sheep shearing, and also a booty, I thought as well. They had a new competition in 1795, which was first of many similar awards for turnips. And it was to be awarded to the person who grew the greatest quantity of turnips, not less than 5 acres. So that's how it all started. That was, say, back in 1795. Now, the early years, 'twas always out at Bodmin. And then Bodmin shared it a bit with Bodmin and Stratton, Bodmin and Elston, Callington one year. And then it got to 1828. And then for quite a few years, it was held down at Truro. And then after that, I was looking at it, I'd say from about 1958 on, it did move around quite a bit for a while. So it was like Camborne, Snozzle, Penzance, Liscard, Truro, Saltash. So you can see it was moving all around the duchy. So I think Albert Riddle was appointed as secretary, I think it was 1957. And it was about this time they were starting to look for a permanent site for the show. And I know Trewithen was mentioned, as well as Quintrell Downs. But the Duchy of Cornwall did have this piece of land at White Cross, just outside Wadebridge. And this was where the show was held in 1957. And I think it was quite successful. So the Duchy did agree to lease the land for a trial period. So 1961, 62, 63. And that's where it's been ever since. So say 57 was Wadebridge, 58 Truro, 59 Liscard. And then from 1960 on, it's been the showground as we know it today up at White Cross. And 'tis grown over the years, and they've got all the traffic management. you will get hangish queues. I must admit, mornings especially, you'll get hangish queues, but they've got it going pretty good now, really. And 'tis always the conversation in town running up to this week is Goin Show. So that then most people say, yep, going up Saturday, or yep, going all 3 days, that sort of thing. But it's very successful. And I say Albert was the secretary, and then Christopher, his son, took over. I'm just glossing over, it today, because this book is absolutely fantastic, but written by Chris. It was on the 1993 he wrote it, so 200 years of the show, of the society, and it's so in depth. Some of the photographs going back are fantastic. If you get a chance to look at a copy, it is well worth reading. And of course, my dear father, he loved the show. He was up all the time. He was, I think, area commissioner at the time, St John Ambulance, and so it was his job to arrange the first aid cover in conjunction with the British Red Cross. So they'd split it. So perhaps this year, Thursday and Saturday, St John Ambulance Brigade would cover the first aid cover, and then the Red Cross would do the Friday, and the next year they would swap. And I remember I was up there quite a few years. I did do a few night duties up there as well, sleeping up there overnight in case anybody got injured. And say, Father absolutely loved that, really did. As far as people passing away up there, thankfully there ain't been that many, really. We used to be on call for the coroner, and we did have a few calls up there, but not many. The one that sticks in my mind was a Wednesday evening, and we had to call up show because people gone up there setting up the day before, and one poor chap sadly passed away in one of the tents there. So we had the police call. They rung on behalf of the coroner. So we had to go to the lower entrance of the show, and we got in, and we were asking a few people there, right, where do you want us to go? And nobody knew what had happened. And then I hear a voice, and 'twas me dear mate, JT. And he stood there with pint in hand, and he says, Breyer, 'tis that tent over there. And 'twas awfully sad, because this chap had been preparing for weeks for the show and passed away the evening before the show. I know people were saying at the time he passed away doing what he loved, but I must admit 'twas quite sad. I do remember one year I went up, went show, come home tea time, and then I took me dog up. I used to go up Coronation Park a bit back then with me dog every night. And I remember seeing an old school friend of mine. He was a teacher, but he was like a friend, really. Angus Lamont, dear of him, no longer with us. And Angus saw me there, and he was actually flying a kite with a banner on. And he was protesting about something. I didn't know what it was. Anyway, he saw me. Oh, David, over here a minute. So he called me over. He said, can you do me a favour? I said, yes, Angus, what do you want? He said, just hang on to this a minute. I want to take a photo. I said, all right. So I got my dog in one hand, and then I got this kite in the other, and Angus disappears into the distance with his camera, and then he climbed over the edge, and he went out of sight. And I reckon he must have been gone about half hour. There's me stood in the middle of Coronation Park. There's people coming and going, walking their dogs, and I'm thinking, what the hang is Breyer up to now? They was giving me a wide berth, really. So I'm stood there with this kite, flying this banner. I don't know what it was all about. And thankfully, eventually Angus did come back, because I thought, surely he hadn't forgot I'm here. But that does always stick in my mind as well. But I've had some brilliant, I always love the show. You go up every year, you know it is going to be I wouldn't say exactly the same, but you know that a lot of the things are going to be the same as last year, and that's part of it. And you just meet up with friends, mates that perhaps you haven't seen since last year. It is like these things where people will come from miles away to go show. So, like I say, I'm working today and tomorrow, but I am open to go up on Saturday and spend the day up there. But as I say, I'll just give a little brief, introduction to where the show started and to where it is today. But if you want to, I'm sure it is on the internet as well, but there's some lovely history to do with it. I think for my Cornish word of the week, I'll do it for tractor, because you will see loads of tractors up there. You'll see all the new ones being sold, but also there's a fantastic area of vintage tractors, traction engines, cars, motorbikes. Well, it is everything down there. And so the Cornish word for tractor is gintenna. Gintenna. And for me Cornish dialect of the week, this is a lovely old one that I've heard. He said, he's like lazy Lawrence's dog. He's that lazy, he leaned his head up against the wall to bark. So there we go. Right, well, I'm going to leave you there now. And I hope you have a good week. And I'll see you again next week. May see you up show on Saturday. But wish you well. Do Guinness. Carnobus Ficken.